So, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. It's 3:30, so it's time to begin. My name is André Lepecki, and since I work around choreography and dance, every time like the clock says it's time, I kind of jump. So I'm just going to jump into the talk this afternoon. But I really feel like before starting, I can't help to feel the presence of these three men over there, and I just want to say surrender to peace. Okay. So I thought I had a paper for you, but I have another paper for you, which meant that actually I had to figure out what I was going through a process of trying to figure out a small detail in the work of Yoko Ono, which means like every time you try to get into a small detail, you spend a lot of time in there because you realize that the detail is actually an entire universe. So I think like the talk will take about 45 minutes. And then after that, we can go back to a kind of interaction for questions and answers, if that's okay. Yeah? All right, so here we go. It's titled, In the Event of Blink. When Tavi and Nyong'o invited me to present a talk in the context of this incredible weekend, he suggested that perhaps I could focus my approach to those practices in Yoko Ono's oeuvre that fall under the general category of dance. Tavia further suggested that perhaps my presentation could be anchored on two concepts that I had advanced around 2011 and 2012, which are the concepts of choreopolice and choreopolitics. Choreopolice and choreopolitics. So it's like the word choreography is in there. Yeah, choreopolice, choreopolitics. So, in addition to the honor of being invited to contribute to this amazing event, I could not have been happier by Tavi's framing of his invitation, since on one hand, it had always seemed to me that Yoko Ono, in many ways, had anticipated in the mid to late 50s and early 60s, many of the traits that would define the experiments developed by the choreographers of the Judson Church Theater, such as Deborah Hayes, Steve Paxton, Yvonne Rainer, Lucida Childs, Trisha Brown, to mention just a few. But also, it had always seemed to me that Ono's conceptualism, and specifically her conceptualism around the practice of dance, identified and expressed tensions immanent to theatrical dance that the concepts of choreopolice and choreopolitics address. Okay, so I was happy for that. And I explain. To put it briefly, choreopolice refers to the management and control of any collective movement that conducts bodies and demands them to circulate only within paths deemed proper for their circulation. Instead of believing that the function of police is only to block or impede movement, police, for me, names whatever stands against the movement. The concept of choreopolice looks also into how the police is a producer of movement, how police is the proper name for normative implementations and managements of movements. In contradistinction, choreopolitics refers to any movement that plans and implements kinetic and somatic modes of collective refusal to choreopoliced conformity. The need to create those two concepts derived from my own discomfort with the notion that in theatrical dance, either you have choreography as a system of command, which in many ways it is, but not always, and therefore as a system of obedience, or, on the other hand, we have improvisation as a kind of anti-choreographic system of free expression. The problem with this dichotomy, for me, is that choreopolice invades even the unconscious, the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems, and therefore, many times, improvisation produces not much more than pathways for more pre-conformed expression. In this sense, it seemed to me that Ono's conceptualism, to which the artist tied immediately that powerful word imagination, offered a whole new dimension to dance, a whole new way for dance to reconceptualize itself as an art form, because Ono was not interested in improvisation, right? She was interested in something else. So you can see how I was really happy with Tavia's invitation and ready to explore how choreopolis is to imperative modes of dancing, what choreopolitics is to Ono's understanding of the score, quote, as a world of fictional rules, the law of the fabricator, end of quote. And in this sense, I was particularly interested in writing about the Yoko Ono Dance Festival of 1967, where dance happens only in your mind or dancing with others by mental telepathy. This is the Yoko Ono Dance Company, and then you can see like this, the whole score that happens in 67, and then each member of the dance can communicate with each other telepathically. So I was quite happy with this whole notion of conceptualism and telepathic participation in dance. So thanks to Tavia's framing of his invitation, this paper was just waiting to be written. But on the way of writing it, something happened, an encounter that became, as days passed, a cut, an unexpected bifurcation, an event, a blink. So this paper is not that one. So you see, as I was going over the different dance instructions contained in Yoko Ono's collection of works, Grapefruit, and as I was reading as much as possible about Ono's oeuvre between 1955 and 1971, I ran into a sentence by Scott McDonald in his often quoted interview with Ono about her films, which are an interview that is printed in his classic A Critical Cinema #2, Interviews with Independent Filmmakers, that came out in 1992. The sentence appears when MacDonald is discussing Ono's first two films, I Blink and One, both from 1966, and which MacDonald describes as being, quote, the first instances of what was to become a mini-genre of avant-garde cinema, the single-shot film, end of quote. I thought that this observation was intriguing, not only for the history of avant-garde film, but also in terms of post-World War II experimental dance history, since the single-shot film was the technique used later on with increased commercial availability of the Sony Portapak video cameras, which becomes more or less available in the late 60s and early 70s. So the single-shot film became the technique used by several visual artists who experimented with choreography and dance. Most notably, or most well-known, Bruce Nauman, but also Paul McCarthy and many others. In almost all examples that I could think of, single-shot dance films by visual artists tended to have one important characteristic. One characteristic that links them directly to the notion of choreopolis. In those videos, the work title functions both as score and as a command. Just to mention a couple of well-known examples, think, for instance, of Bruce Nauman's walking in an exaggerated manner around the perimeter of a square, 1969, or of Paul McCarthy's painting a straight line. In these single-shot films, the artists enact as close as possible the instruction contained in the title, critically revealing the commanding structure of choreography over movement. You see what I'm saying? Right? So the title becomes an instruction, it becomes the title, which is a command which the artist follows obediently, right? Or as best as possible. So here is like Nauman walking around the perimeter of a square, McCarthy doing a straight line. Sorry. So if MacDonald was crediting Ono as being one of the very early pioneers of the single-shot structural film, it seemed to be necessary to take a quick look at the two non-dance, they're officially not tagged as dance films, two non-dance films he mentioned, I Blink and One. I just wanted to know what was going on there. So I went to the casual avant-garde art historian's best friend. I'm not an art historian, so I just go to the web, UberWeb, and quickly found both films under the site link to the Flux Film Anthology, which is, you can go online and find this, which is a series of 41 films gathered by Georgia Masiunas in 1966 and subsequently edited in DVD format by Jonas Mekas in 1992. So I went to the site, I clicked the links, I watched the films, and I blinked. The blink soon became a cut, which became a bifurcation, which became an event, which became a rabbit hole. So let me be as simple and as direct as I possibly can here. First of all, I Blink is not one film, but two. It appears twice in the Flux Film Anthology, as Flux Film number 9 and as Flux Film number 15. Second, when I Blink reappears, it does so with a striking difference. And third, that striking difference, which is not the fact that the second occurrence is 20 seconds shorter than the first one, which it is, okay, but that's not what I'm talking about. So, that striking difference had been oddly unaccounted for. Indeed, it has remained unseen in all of the accounts I could find about the film, including the description of I Blink by the French critic and art historian Maeve Aubert in the little catalog that accompanies the DVD Flux Film Anthology. So this ignoring or this non-seeing of that striking difference between the two iterations of what is supposedly to be the same film derives from a severance between title and movement. And I believe that it is in that gap that Ono's extraordinary contribution to a future choreographic imagination, where her incredible choreopolitical move stirs up to today. For in that difference between the two films, there is a whole dance taking place. It is a dance that relaunches a new direction, both for a theory of performance and for a history of experimental dance. Indeed, I would argue that the resurgence with the difference of I Blink exemplifies what is at stake in Ono's dance conceptualism. And what is at stake is this: the destruction of a whole field of choreopolist movements through a choreopolitics of the blink, which Ono performs by invoking a dance of the penumbral. I love this word in English, penumbral, like when the shadows arrive. So it's a dance of the shadows, a dance of darkness, which is not really Butoh. It's something else. Are you okay? Like, is this too confusing? So far, so good? You promise? Okay, all right. It's confusing to me because, as I said, I went into the rabbit hole. So I'm still there. All right, so we have one film that has one title, two modes of appearance, and the way it reappears is strikingly different than the first way, and the second way seems to never be accounted for somehow, at least in everything that I could grab my hands on. So what happens then in I Blink? What is its event? And why and how, under which conditions, and in what context does the supposedly same film return in the sequence of the Flux Film Anthology to mark a difference that is negated in so many narratives about the film, including in the DVD's liner notes? So let's go step by step in this filmic choreography. Let's start by looking at I Blink as dance. And let's start by stating the obvious, since I guess there is no other way of saying it. As opposed to a title as instruction, or a title that describes and also prescribes the action depicted in the film, as in the structural films that we just saw, right, the Bruce Nauman and the other one, I Blink misleads, or in Austinian terms, misfires, or in choreopolitical terms, disobeys. Why is that? Because in I Blink, first of all, there is no blinking. The OED offers the following definition of to blink, quote, to shut the eyelids momentarily and involuntarily, to wink for an instant, to shut the eyes too, end of quote. But clearly this is not what happens in eye blink. This not happening short-circuits some art historical expectations regarding instruction art, particularly the function of instructions in relation to their execution by their performers. The latter always understood as a kind of paradoxical passive enactor of a title that is also a command. This not happening scrambles circuits of preformed expectations in such a way that even an astute historian of Ono's films, such as Chrissy Isles, in her essential essay titled Frame by Frame, The Films of Yoko Ono, which came out in the Serpentine catalog for Yoko Ono's exhibition in 2012, even Chrissy Isles misperceives and misdescribes the film. Perhaps under the spell of the instructional title, this is how Isles describes eye blink, quote, "In eye blink, Ono's eye is seen looking directly at the camera as her eyelid slowly closes and opens, in a brief shot stretched to last 35 seconds, end of quote. Isles is not alone, since in the catalog for the 2013-14 Ono retrospective exhibition, Half a Wind Show, which happened in many places in Europe, including the Guggenheim Bilbao, the curators also operate a telling choreopolicing correction of the film, kind of forcing a blink on Ono by representing the film in the catalog in the following manner. As we move from left to right in the proper direction of reading in the West, the disposition of this image of the two frames from the film correct or fit or force title and action to amalgamate in a way that suggests, indeed, the proper movement of a blink, from open to shut eyelids. If we have to animate it, we go like. However, what we are given to see by Ono in extreme slow motion is not an eye closing and opening, but rather an eye slowly opening. Ono's eye slowly opening. The history of this 35-second black and white single-shot 16mm film is well known. George McYunus asked Ono to come over to Peter Moore's apartment on 36th Street, since McYunus had secured a high-speed scientific camera and wanted Ono to do some experiments. Peter Moore would be the cinematographer. Ono arrived and quickly created two works in that session, Eye Blink and the 5-minute-long One. Shot at 2,000 frames per second, when projected at the regular 24 frames per second, the effect is of an extremely slow down motion, a kind of dreamlike effect. But as beautiful and as impactful as the film is for sure, its action does not correspond to its title. Ono's eye slowly opens, stares at us, but never shuts. Instead, the film abruptly ends. The film simply cuts the action of blinking midway, leaving Ono's eye staring directly at us. Now, you may ask, why make such a big deal of this? Okay, for two reasons. The first is choreographic, or better, choreopolitical. 4, if in the tradition of structural one-shot films, the title tends to function as command, in Ono's Eye Blink, there is definitely, if not open disobedience, at least a kind of purposeful deviation. This movement of nonconformity is already very interesting. The second reason to linger a little bit longer on this film has to do with art history's own complex and often conflicted relation to performance art and to body parts, particularly with gendered and racialized body parts in performance. Perhaps gendered and racialized body parts moving in nonconformity may be one of the reasons why Alexander Munro must ask in her opening essay for the catalog, Yes, Yoko Ono, quote, "Why has the canon of post-war modernism been slow to accept Yoko Ono's art?" End of quote. Indeed, in Scott McDonald's already mentioned interview with Ono, listen to what he has to say about eye blink. I'm going to quote Scott McDonald here. "I like that film a lot. Framed the way it is, the eye becomes erotic. It's suggestive of body parts normally considered more erotic." End of quote. And before the critics' blatant hyper-eroticization and displacement of one of Ono's body parts to what the critic considers to be more erotic body zones, the artist simply sidesteps, or rather, she cuts or slays. She says, "One of those high-speed films I like best was the one you didn't mention, Smoking." End of quote. And until the end of their interview, eye blink is never discussed again. And one last reason to make a big deal out of this film and the ways it has been misrepresented or misperceived is the following. As I mentioned earlier, in the Flux film anthology, eye blink returns, and it does so with a difference that is not accounted for, not in the little catalog accompanying the DVD, and not in all the sources that I have read about the work. Okay, so in the Flux film anthology, this is the sequence of Yoko Ono's work as you go through the DVD, right? Through the way the anthology was compiled by McCunis. So you have Flux Film 9, Eye Blink, which you saw, 35 seconds, 1966. We have Flux Film 14, titled 1, 5 minutes, 1966. Then you have Flux Film 15, Eye Blink, 15 seconds. And then you have Flux Film 16, 4, 6 minutes, 15 seconds. There was just a really fantastic lecture about 4 right before this one. Okay, so this is the sequence of the films. In the catalogs, little informative entries about each film. So each one of the films, there's a catalog in the DVD collection, and each one of the films has about like 2 or 3 paragraphs about the film. When we get to Flux Film 15, which is the return of Eye Blink, this is what we get. Refer to Flux Film number 9. So it's the only one. It's the only case in the whole catalog that says, "Okay, I've said everything I had to say. Just go back to that one. It's the same film." It's as if Flux Film number 15, despite being 20 seconds shorter, was exactly the same as Flux Film number 9. Indeed, in UberWeb, the art historian's, the dilettante art historian's best friend, even if the different duration of the 2 films is correctly acknowledged on the website, both links take us to the same 35-second long version, as if there were no difference. Again, why does this matter? It matters because Ono is an artist of extreme attention to detail. An artist who is inaugurating, according to Barbara Hiskell's expression, quote, "a whole new mode of performance art which favored single actions and insignificant quotidian phenomena." I think like the insignificant as this kind of detail that we must attend to, right? Now, importantly, and this is where the hermeneutics of the minor or of the insignificant detail in Ono's whole new mode of performance art gains a solid footing, importantly, Ono's way of attending to the insignificant and of finding signification in the discarded, the neglected, the deemed irrelevant, were all brought to the fore thanks to her very specific mode, or art historically extemporaneous mode of attending to the minor. And what was Ono's mode of attending the overlooked? I would say that mode was moved by one principle: never to allow a detail to be left to chance. Indeed, if there's something Ono has no patience with, is to leave her works open to chance procedures, especially in that period. Against all the ethos of the late 50s and early 60s, where the influence of John Cage is everywhere and where happenings inform the gregarious informality of a movement later known as fluxes, Ono was openly suspicious of both the kind of gregarious agitation informing happenings, as much as she was openly against the hegemony of chance procedures. Regarding the latter, in the already quoted 1962 text titled Words of a Fabricator, it's a text by Ono, Ono writes how the act of, quote, leaving oneself in the hands of chance operation rubs me the wrong way, end of quote. And 50 years later, in an email to John Hendricks, written September 1st, 2014, Ono further clarifies. She writes, John, in words of a fabricator, I'm hitting chance operation as phony. Okay? So, never allow a detail to be left to chance. So there's that in relationship to chance procedures. As for the agitation of happenings and their kind of in-your-face gregariousness, Ono says the following, also in For the Wesleyan People, which, by the way, is written the day after she shot I Blink, which is also super interesting. So this is a text that is written the day after she shot these films. Okay, so this is what Ono has to say. Quote, event, to me, is not an assimilation of all the other arts, as happenings seem to be, but an extrication from the various sensory perceptions. It's a kind of reduction. It is not a get-togetherness, as most happenings are, but a dealing with oneself. Also, it has no script as a happening as happenings do, though it has something that starts it moving. The closest word for it may be wish or hope. Is that amazing? I'm going to read it again because it's so beautiful. Is that okay? So, event to me is not an assimilation of all the other arts as happening tend to be, but an extrication from the various sensory perceptions. It is not a get-togetherness, as most happenings are, but a dealing with oneself. Also, it has no script, as happenings do, though it has something that starts it moving. The closest word for it may be wish or hope. So, what is the event without script in I Blink? What is that something in I Blink that starts moving, and that by moving may be synonymous to wish or to hope? And why and how does the event of and in the blink return with a difference to demonstrate, indeed, to perform Ono's moving singularity in the landscape of avant-garde art in the late 50s and early 60s, an avant-garde scene that always was kind of suspicious of Ono's performance, vision, conceptualism? In order to answer these questions, we need to remember that for Ono, an event is, first of all, not just merely the agitated state of something happening. An event slowly occurs across different instantiations of minor movements, in their confluence, and in their duration. In the case of eye blink, I would say that the event spans across not only the extended time of the opening of the eye, but also across the two versions of the film. That span is bridged by the 4 other films and by the 4 other artists and by Ono's 5-minute-long one, right? So this one is amazing because it's where we see a match being lit and then extinguishing in a dreamlike and slowed-down reperformance for the camera of Ono's 1955 lighting piece. So the 2 eye blinks are mediated by a performance of light and darkness. This is a still from one, which was shot before eye blink, and is shown after. We saw how in the first appearance of eye blink, flux film number 9, an eye, racially marked, slowly opens its eyelids to stare straight at us, unblinking. Amplified by the silence of the film, the close-up of the shot, and the extreme slow motion of Ono's eyelids opening, the viewer has no choice but to deal with oneself. The optical unconscious is all there, but so is the political unconscious, revealing a force that disturbs the possibility of passivity before that unblinking eye. And then another event within the event. Ono's staring gaze is cut violently and abruptly. Remember, like the last image, there's like, right? There's even like a line that crosses the image. We can see this in the last frame of the film, as the slow movement is frozen and a horizontal line slashes across the image, reminding us of the centrality of the action and of the word cut in Ono's oeuvre. Initially, I had thought that this abrupt ending was due to chance, that maybe they had just run out of film stock. But again, and as I mentioned, not only Ono was not interested in chance, to say it mildly, but Jeff Hendricks informs us that the original eye blink film lasted 3 minutes. So the cut here, interrupting the movement and slicing the eye 35 seconds into the film, must be taken as a kind of purposeful composition. As purposeful, I cannot say this word in English, as purposeful interruption of movement of a body part, it must therefore be taken as a kind of choreographic decision. The fact that Ono's eye does not shut, does not blink, and that the film abruptly stops when she's staring at us directly is an event worth attending to. But an event is precisely not a happening, and therefore, against Capro, an event has no problem in returning, precisely because the temporality of the event is to be extemporaneous, both eruptive and interruptive, which is not at all the same as to say ephemeral or non-repeatable. If there is event, it is always a durational constellation. So, how does eye blink return? It returns with a wish or a hope moving it. A hopeful wish or a wishful hope. It returns under camouflage, still under the title Flux Film Number 9, as displayed in the film's leader, right? Those little things that happened before, like, right? Even if it is to be reshown again under the new reference Flux Film Number 15. So it's camouflaged. It returns with the new duration of 15 seconds, but above all, it returns not to be cut. Moreover, and this is the difference that matters, the difference that makes a difference, when eye blink returns in Flux Film Anthology, it does so with a blink. But it's not Ono's blink. It's the camera's, and therefore, metonymically, our own. Eye blink returns to perform the shutting of our eyes. And now, You tell me if I'm seeing things. You tell me later. You say, Andre, you're crazy. Okay. I'm going to try to persuade you. Rather than ending with a cut, okay, no cut, right? Okay, that we can agree. Flux film 15 ends with a slow dissolve into black. Can we agree on that? Like it dissolves into black. And the image fades with Ono's eyes being involved by a darkening that comes from the margins of the image towards its center, as if Ono's eyeball was sucking in all of the surrounding light. This is a kind of slow blink that throws us radically back into ourselves. I said black into ourselves, which has to do with the darkness. Into the depth of an all-encompassing and surrounding darkness. The first movement of this actual blink starts with Ono opening her eye, but the second part of the blink is transposed to the camera, to the shutter, and then excorporated to us. Because you have to imagine, okay, the camera's eye, which metonymically is also our eye, closes Ono's eye, enclosing it in darkness. But if we imagine that this exchange taking place in the place where it's supposed to take place, which is not this place, but a dark room where 16mm projected films are projected, then the involving darkness is not limited only to the frame of the image, but once it arrives, it involves all of us. It spreads all around us. So, what kind of movement is this? What kind of event is this? If we wanted to represent it, we could now do it in this way that I found in the catalog, in this kind of temporal sequencing of its unfolding, okay? The end of the first film and the end of the second film. One with a cut, the other one with for the darkness, right? Then we know that the one on the right will go to pitch dark, right? Okay. What kind of event is summoned by the advent of darkness in eye blink's return with a difference? How come Ono's eye becomes a black hole, a singularity, capturing all surrounding light and giving us darkness in return? And how might this movement of occlusion of light and spreading of darkness under the interpolative stare of the artist be a choreopolitical dance? The first thing to say is that darkness for Ono is absolutely affirmative. Darkness is not defined negatively as a lack of light, but positively as an element or substance or condition that lacks nothing, and as such must be tackled directly not only by the visual arts, but also by dance. As Ono's friend and collaborator Toshi Ishiyanagi wrote in August of 1962 in a defense of Ono's being attacked in Japan, he writes the following: "Many people say that the stage during Ono's performance is too dark to discern anything that is going on there. But she believes that spotlighting focal points to the audience insults their intelligence. She would like viewers to have unique experiences by feeling an atmosphere and a flow of air in the darkness, by lighting matches to see, or by walking and groping for performers. They would find out, the audience, that many things are going on in the darkness." End of quote. So filled with events, darkness, and sometimes pitch darkness is the condition in which many of Ono's performances took place. This description of all of these. More emphatically, and this is the end of this paper, darkness is the condition under which dance specifically should take place. The day after she shot I Blink, in the already mentioned For the Wesleyan People, Ono expresses her wish for a dance in darkness. I quote, "Since when did dance become a pasted face exhibitionism of dancers in spotlighted stage? Can you not communicate if it is total dark?" End of quote. This is not the first time Ono had asked for a dance in the dark. 5 years earlier, Ono had proposed the following dance piece for stage performance. Dance in pitch dark, ask audience to light a match if they want to see. A person may not light more than one match. 1961, autumn. Ono's anti-photophiliac, I don't know if this word exists, but photophilia is like the love of light. Anti-photophiliac choreographic program, this one, reverses, upheaves, overthrows as firmly as possible the transcendent principle that has historically organized theatrical dance in Western imagination. Indeed, in a series of texts compiled under the title Crayonné au théâtre, scribbled in the theater of 1897, the French poet and dance critic Stéphane Mallarmé identified the sovereign source of all theatrical dance. For Mallarmé, that source was not, the sovereign source was not the dancer, was not the choreographer, was not the audience, was not the stage, was not the theater, it was not the critic, but simply le lustre, the chandelier. Hovering above it all, the chandelier for Mallarmé is the transcendental light that transfixes dance as a vast photological project of illuminated bodies, not only therefore beings for movement, but above all, beings for light. Those pasted-faced exhibitionists, dancers, on the spot-lit stage that Ono was wary of. With darkness emerging as a hope that moves the event of I Blink's return, Ono reconceptualizes dance and also its history. In the dark, particularly in the darkness of the cranial space that now replaces the illuminated stage, there is a kind of quiet liberation, a gentle penumbral movement that is both conceptual and affective, deeply material and concrete, a liberatory endarkment that Ono celebrated and worked on and for consistently through the years, at least as early as her first published artwork, the short story of a grapefruit in the world of Park, published in Wesleyan University's The Campus newspaper on October 26, 1955. The consistency of this movement towards darkness remains Ono's boldest choreopolitical gesture. And then, if you don't mind, I'm just going to read the last paragraph of Grapefruit in the Park, because it's the text of a young, budding artist at Sarah Lawrence. She's quite young, and she writes the following. This is the end of the text, okay? And I think we can listen with the endarkenment and Yoko's staring at us to see how do we deal with that, each one of us. People started to leave, and soon the park was all cleared out. The faint wind crossed over the table and gradually dried up the pasted skin and the row of the seeds of the grapefruit. The sound of the closing gate permeated the dusk. A bird hopped on the table and picked up a little piece of green leaf. For a while, the place turned into a pool of warm lights. Even the mossy bark of the old trees glittered gold. But then, before long, the green, the clouds, and the park all vanished together into darkness. The seed stayed shining till the last little reflected spots inside the retina and went out. Thank you. Thank you so much. So that was my rabbit hole. Yeah, I don't know what to say, but we have 15 minutes. And any comments, any questions you may have, clarifications, suggestions, critiques are most welcome. Or deliriums, you know. Oh, there's a microphone there. Yes.
Hi, André. Thank you for that beautiful talk. I have a question about if you've thought about the eye, Ono's eye, or just the eye, I guess, on the visage as a very overdetermined site of racial marking, racial difference. If you could say more about that.
Sure. So I gestured towards that in the beginning. And there's a whole section that I had to cut, which had precisely... Remember that moment when I talked about how Scott McDonald addresses the film and then has this strange displacement of like, your eye is erotic, but it reminds me of more erotic, and she's just like, you know, no, right? And then I had a whole section after that, you know, especially like thinking through the kind of foreignness, strangeness, and this ongoing projected Orientalism on top of Yoko Ono's body, which may have actually be the thing that prevented her, not only her acceptance as a visual artist, but actually as acceptance as a performance artist, right? So what does it mean to be interpolated by a markedly racialized eye? Not so sure if through the image we can say it's gendered, right? But I can definitely say it is, in this context that we are in right now with the three men over there, it's definitely, you know, something necessarily. It is part of the event, for sure. I also wanted to say that maybe there's another film called Blink in the Flux anthology, which you may know, which is the John Kavanagh film titled Blink, which is 2.5 minutes long, and it's absolutely violent. It's basically a stroboscopic experience, right? And there's something about the violence of that stroboscopic experience and the kind of invitation towards darkness that this racialized eye brings us into, that does something quite interesting in visual arts and dance's relationship to the dark. If English Darby asks, how can we see a work of art in complete darkness? I think Ono is asking us, how is it that we can see darkness? And I don't know if it's as a work of art, but as a space that is summoned by her body. And I'm not answering your question straightforward, but this is where I was at, more or less. There's a whole section about body parts, and yes, and yeah, so thank you, more to think of. Tavia, you here? I just said you're like invoked in the first two pages of this paper. Yes.
Thank you so much for the beautiful talk. I just anecdotally kept thinking about Castle's work, The Darkness and the Match Piece, and had a beautiful, weird genealogical journey in my head there. But my question, thinking with you and about the very detailed and specific kind of choreographer that Ono is, as you've beautifully mapped out for us, I'm wondering if you've thought about the fact that it is only one eye, and it is like a kind of particular framing of the body. And also I'm thinking in relationship to some of her other work that is these like very specific frames. Maybe there's nothing there, but it was something that came to mind.
I'm sorry, I don't know if I actually caught the question.
Why do you think that there's only one eye in
Only
these
one
works?
eye.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a very simple way of answering that, because I was like obsessed and trying to find as much information as possible beyond UbuWeb. And there's an interview in which Ono and other people in the room, or art historians, will know about this for sure. She was just saying, I got a phone call, and McCune is like, come over, let's do something. I have this camera, we have to do it. And once being the first shot, I thought like maybe Ono had already, like the lighting matches is like a very iconic piece from the 50s. So I thought this looks like something that she would do. And then she said, then I thought about the eye. And she says, I don't really like the film because my eye came out wrong. And I don't know what that means. It may have been just a question of like taking advantage of a scientific camera. It may have been only technical, maybe. So that's one simple answer. It may have been like technical issues had to do with the camera and all of that, and cinematography and all of that. Cannot answer more than this. Now, in the kind of hermeneutics of the detail, and just like forgetting the referential, and just being in a space of delirium, which is also the space of imagination that, as I said, Ono's conceptualism invites us always to be with the side of imagination. I cannot help but imagine that the monocular vision metonymically aligns her eye with the eye of the camera, right? The camera is also monocular, right? Her eye will be also monocular. Her vision will be also monocular here. What does that do to us is interesting. Binocularly staring at the monocular, right, device that rends one eye. I think that one eye capturing light is a much more beautiful sculpture and body part than two, because it emphasizes the figure of the singularity, of the black hole, and of the capacity for the eye to be enamored with light and wanting to have it. So I feel like this is kind of a vortex kind of thing. I would see it that way. This is my imagination. What do you guys think? I don't know. What other deliriums could you have around this, if we have time? I don't know if there's time.
Thank you for the beautiful talk. And I also was thinking about the one eye. Oh, hi.
Oh, yes.
And that it fits with this beautiful relationship to the title that you talked about, right? Because as I understand it, a wink is one eye, and a blink is two eyes, right? Like that's the distinction between those words.
Yeah.
So it's called blink, but we only get one eye.
Yeah.
It's not a wink, which has all kinds of other lewdish kind of connotations. So it seems,
like this opening up, right? This kind of emergence. Yeah, I think she's amazing. Hi.
Thanks for this. This is so great. Excuse me. You mentioned, and in thinking about how reflexively other critics or whatever can distort these intentions by artists, and you mentioned something that struck me particularly that was from her words about talking about chance. And how she's rejecting that as a, maybe just being unhappy with that aspect as an artist. Was that in any way reflective of, like, she has this experience with her own art, like Cut Piece is a good example of that. Like she's inviting something that is a kind of unknown about to happen, and maybe talking about that as being unhappy with how that comes across.
That's very interesting. Then we have to make a distinction between chance procedure, right? Chance procedure as a compositional device for objects that can be manipulated somehow, including dancers. I'm sorry to call them objects now, but and the difference between that and the invitation for an event, which would be to say, in cut piece, what I feel must have been, I've never experienced it live, but I can imagine that what must be the most interesting aspect is to see how each one of the audience walks towards her, right? And what is the intention of the cut? And that's precisely the non-gregarious agitation of happenings, but is actually the event as something that has in it a principle of movement, which is the invitation, but then you have to deal with yourself, with oneself. She has to deal with herself receiving the cut, and the person cutting must address the relation, right? And that's very, very interesting. And I think that's different than the chance procedures that she was talking about in that critique of chance procedures. Which, by the way, like there's a text by Yvonne Rainer, which I think comes later, in which Yvonne Rainer is very impatient also with John Cage and chance procedures and all of that. No. And that actually, there's an ethics of caring that I find interesting there. There's an ethics, for sure, if not a politics, right? Yeah. Do we have more time, or one more question? I have a question for you. Is this like a delirium, or is there a difference between film number 1 and film number 2? Like, I really wanted to know, because if there isn't, I'll never read this paper again, and then this becomes a happening in Capro's terms, and that's it. But otherwise, I'll keep repeating it. And what do you think? Right. Right. What you were saying rings true. Right? Yeah. And also like the force of the signifier in the description, like in I blink, Yoko Ono shuts and opens her. No, right? Yes, sorry.
I just wanted to comment. What I admire about one of the things I admire about your presentation is that you're focusing on the formal precision and conceptual precision.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So that's, I just wanted
Oh,
to say that.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
and you're also doing a close reading of her early theoretical texts, which I think call out for much more close reading.
Yeah.
And also reading even just basically in the context of intellectual history, where they're not even part of they're manifestos that deserve careful attention.
Yeah.
And I find there's relatively little secondary literature that acknowledges that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. But just to add a little, I really wanted to pursue the way in which that last paragraph in Grapefruit, which is about like the tranquility of darkness coming in, and then these last little specks of light in the retina, and how that's an image that keeps unfolding. I cannot help but to think about, this is also by chance, but bless you, but the 16 millimeter always leaves like these little white specks. So there's something like, that event is actually always being summoned by Yoko Ono in a very, very detailed way, very precise, otherwise it's not going to come into the world. Anyway, thank you, I appreciate that. I guess I need to wrap. Okay, thank you.